Did you know that some of the most beautiful classical music that was ever written was written by queer composers who defied society's harshest norms? Hi, I'm Chris with a K, and welcome back to the channel. This week in queer history, we're going to be celebrating the birthday of legendary Baroque composer George Friedrich Handel. And how are we going to celebrate? With a list of the top 15 queer classical composers, of course. And if you stick around to the end, I'll share how learning about these composers deepened my connection to classical music and to myself. So let's get into it.
This week in queer history, stories told with love and
Number 15, John Cage. A radical innovator, Cage challenged every convention of music, from prepared pianos to his famous 4-minute and 33 seconds of silence. It's bizarre, but yeah, you should definitely experience it once. His relationships with both men and women reflected his avant-garde approach to life. His long-term partnership with choreographer Merce Cunningham was also a defining element of his creative output. Number 14, Franz Schubert. The master of the art song, Schubert's lieder conveyed deep longing and melancholy. Music historian Maynard Solomon has suggested that his lyrics and personal letters indicate an attraction to men. His inner world remains a subject of much debate, but his music speaks of profound emotional intensity. Number 13, Samuel Barber. Known for the heartbreaking Adagio for strings, Barber was an openly gay composer in a time when discretion was often the norm. His relationship with Menotti spanned decades, and his music is often filled with lyrical intensity, and it reflects a deep emotional sensitivity. Barber won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, solidifying his place in American classical music. Number 12, Giancarlo Menotti. An Italian composer and lifelong partner of Samuel Barber, Menotti revolutionized opera with his Pulitzer Prize-winning works, The Consul and The Saint of Bleecker Street. He founded the Spoleto Festival in the United States and later expanded it internationally. Menotti's bold storytelling and lush compositions continue to captivate audiences today. Number 11, Friedrich Chopin. Long celebrated for his romantic relationships with women, particularly writer George Sand, Chopin's letters suggest a more complex story. Some historians argue that his correspondence with Titus Tchaikovsky reveals an intense, possibly romantic attachment. And whether or not he acted on these feelings, his music is filled with longing and tenderness, which totally speaks of deep emotional complexity. Number 10, Francis Poulenc. A composer who blended wit, melancholy, and deep spirituality, Poulenc was one of the first openly gay composers to find mainstream success. His works range from the playful La Mamelle de Tiresias to the deeply religious Dialogue de Carmelite. Poulenc never hid his sexuality, balancing his devotion to Catholicism with his personal truths. Number 9, Leonard Bernstein. A larger-than-life figure in music and activism, Bernstein composed West Side Story and brought classical music to the masses. Though married to Felicia Montelegre, he had numerous relationships with men, embracing his identity more and more later in his life. His passionate conducting style and his advocacy for civil rights, and his influence on American music culture cement his place as a queer icon. Number 8, Aaron Copland. The quintessential American composer, Copland captured the spirit of the United States with Appalachian Spring, rodeo, and fanfare for the common man. Though intensely private, letters and accounts reveal relationships with men, including artist Prentice Taylor. His music, often associated with the grandness of the American landscape, was revolutionary, both for its modernist approach and for the life Copland lived behind the notes. Number 7, Benjamin Britten. One of the UK's greatest composers, Britten revolutionized 20th century opera with works like Peter Grimes and The Turn of the Screw. His music explored themes of isolation and psychological depth and queer identity. His lifelong partnership with tenor Sir Peter Pears was central to his life and to his work. Britten composed many of his most famous pieces with Pears' voice in mind, and together they founded the Aldeburgh Festival, which remains a cornerstone of classical music. Number 6, Ethel Smythe. A fearless composer and activist, Smythe shattered gender norms in classical music and beyond. She was a key figure in the women's suffrage movement, composing the March of the Women, which was an anthem for the cause. She was open about her relationships, too, with women. She was romantically linked to the suffragette leader Emmeline Pankhurst, and later fell in love with Virginia Woolf at the age of 71. Her music included the powerful opera The Wreckers, which remains a testament to her defiant spirit. Number 5, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. One of the most emotionally evocative composers of all time, Tchaikovsky's works like Swan Lake, The Sleeping Beauty, and The Nutcracker are beloved worldwide. Yet beneath the grandeur of his music lay a life of personal turmoil. As a gay man in 19th century Russia, even today Russia, but 19th century Russia, he endured a deep inner conflict, and he tried to suppress his identity, and he entered a disastrous marriage that only lasted a few weeks. But his letters suggest passionate feelings towards men. His pain and longing permeate his music, particularly in his Pathetic Symphony, which is often interpreted as a coded farewell. Number 4, Friedrich the Great. More than just the King of Prussia, Friedrich was a philosopher, a military strategist, and a passionate musician. He composed symphonies and sonatas for the flute, often performing them himself. Friedrich's relationships with men, particularly his intense bond with Hans Hermann von Katt, have led historians to explore his possible queerness. Though he eventually married for political reasons, his heart seemingly remained elsewhere. His court was a haven for intellectuals, artists, and composers, including Johann Sebastian Bach's son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. Number 3, Arcangelo Corelli. A master of the concerto grosso and a leading violinist of his time, Corelli was one of the key figures in Baroque instrumental music. He moved in artistic and aristocratic circles that included Cardinal Pietro Ottoboni, a known gay clergyman, and other patrons who supported sexual fluid lifestyles. While details on his personal life remain speculative, his deep friendships and associations suggested that he thrived in a world where queer identities were not uncommon. His music, defined by its elegant melodies and dramatic contrast, continues to be celebrated today. Number 2, Jean-Baptiste Lully. A pioneer of French opera, Lully's music defined the extravagance of Louis XIV's court. His works fused Italian and French styles, shaping the future of ballet and opera. Lully's personal life was equally theatrical. He was known to have relationships with both men and women, and despite his strategic marriage to maintain his status, everyone sort of knew. His influence on Baroque music was immense, though his career ended abruptly after he accidentally stabbed his own foot with a conducting staff, leading to a fatal infection. Ugh. Number 1, George Friedrich Handel. Born on February 23, 1685, Handel was one of the greatest composers of the Baroque era. He was known for masterpieces like The Messiah and Water Music. Heard of them? Handel never married, which has led to speculation about his personal life and relationships. While concrete evidence about his sexuality remains elusive, he moved within vibrant social circles that included influential male figures, which sparked debates about his queer identity. Maybe? Handel's work reflects a profound emotional depth. His oratorios and operas often grapple with themes of love and loss and redemption. Handel's story isn't unique, though. His ambiguous sexuality is part of a broader legacy of queer composers whose music and lives broke boundaries. When I was a kid, my mom had this old record player in our living room, and she would let it spin for hours and hours on the weekends. I can still see her fingers gently putting the needle down on the record, and that faint crackle as the record came to life. And I didn't know any of the names of the composers back then, but just that feeling of each record. And my mom would close her eyes and I can see her swaying to the music. And I didn't realize it back then, but those records planted a seed in me, one that would grow for years. And I wouldn't even recognize it until later when I stumbled into my first college music appreciation class. It was my freshman year, and the winters on campus were brutal. I'd shuffle across the icy paths with my red wool scarf wrapped around my neck, and I rush to my 8 a.m. class, and the lecture hall was huge. It was just almost too big to feel any kind of personal connection, but I'd climb up those concrete steps and find my seat, and the cold lingered on me and I couldn't focus. But then the professor would press play. The first notes of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite floated around us, and suddenly I wasn't in that sterile classroom anymore. Britten's Peter Grimes felt like waves crashing against a shore, and Copland's Appalachian Spring painted rolling hills and open skies. And every piece carried me to a new place and to a new story. It became a game. Could I guess the composer by the sound? Could I feel their style and the way that the notes bent, or how their melody danced? And I learned in that class to listen deeply, to let the music tell you the tale. But something was missing. My professor asked us to imagine stories for each piece, to assign them emotions and characters, and I love that part. But I always felt like I was reaching, that like the music was rich and full of life, but where was the composer in all of it? And I didn't know that Tchaikovsky's raw aching came from a man who was struggling to reconcile his sexuality in a country that condemned him for it. And I didn't know that Britten was writing for the love of his life, or that Copland's gentle melodies held the quiet defiance of a man who lived authentically in a time that didn't make space for him. And now when I listen to their music, I feel it even more deeply than ever. It's not just about notes on the page or melodies in the air. It's about their legacy. Knowing that so many of these composers were queer or had to hide something, just like I did in my past, it makes their work even more powerful. Their stories remind me that LGBTQ people have always shaped culture, pushing boundaries and creating beauty that endures even today. And now I don't just listen, I connect. I celebrate them and I take pride in the music that's always been ours. So what does Handel and the legacy of these composers mean to you? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more queer history, click this video right over here. And you can always sign up for our newsletter where I send out inspirational, optimistic, uplifting, historical events that are happening this week. Until next time, stay strong, stay bold, and keep making history.